What is up, guys? Welcome back to OverTakes. This is Misfit. In this episode, it is our season-ending awards time. So we're going to do a bunch of awards for Coach of the Year, Comeback Player. I already gave out my MVP and Rookie of the Year awards. We did that on two separate shows. You can go back and check those out. But before we dive in, I'd like to thank everybody for joining me. Everybody out there on YouTube, thank you very much for all of your support. It's greatly, greatly appreciated. If you're new, please hit a like, hit a subscribe, hit the alert bell, get notified when I do Overwatch League content. I took a little bit of time off, needed to regroup, watch some stuff, play some games, and decided to take a few days off in this month or so that we had. I took about a week off away from doing content. I'm back. Ready to go. We're going to do some awards, and then at the end of the show, I'll kind of give you where I'm at as far as content for the finals and how we're going to preview that. We did have one All-Star event. We had the APAC version of the All-Star game. It was on Saturday, really early in the morning. It was fun. There was some things that, they had the Widowmaker 1v1. I thought the All-Star game itself was kind of meh, minus doing the tiny Overwatch thing and putting some variants in there other than just a standard match. It made it fun. We had a Winston challenge. That was kind of cool. But the Widow 1v1 is always the kicker. We also had a version of the Hero Gauntlet, the version of the gun game that they do. And Rascal won that. That was fun. It's an all-star game. I'm not a big all-star game person. I like the skills competition is a little bit better in regular traditional sports, like even things like slam dunk contest, 3-point shooting contest, and in the NFL when they do some of the Pro Bowl week, they have the different skills challenges for quarterbacks and running backs and linemen and all that kind of stuff. It's more fun to me than the actual game. Yeah, there was money on the line this time, so some of these guys tried a little bit harder, but at the end of the day, it's just a fun event. We had DM repeating as the Widowmaker 1v1 winner, and then Gushue won the Winston Skills Challenge. So it was a fun event, but let's get into what we're here for. This is my end of season awards. Outside of, like I said earlier, the MVP and the Rookie of the Year, which I felt deserved a whole episode. And then I have the rest of my awards on this show. So here's the categories that we're going to go over. So you guys can think about this while you're listening to it. You agree with me, disagree with me, however you want to do it. So we're going to do Coach of the Year, Comeback Player of the Year. I call this one the Out of Nowhere Player. We have Most Improved, Surprise Team of the Year, and the Most Disappointing Team of the Year. So, yeah, there are awards, or in the last case, not an award, but kind of a small postseason wrap-up type of thing. And before we dive deep into it after the finals, which are coming up in less than a week, guys. So we have less than a week left before we wrap up the 2020 season. Let's start off with Coach of the Year. Now, this one was a tough one. There were a lot of coaches that did amazing jobs with their teams this year. Some of the usual suspects like Krusty. Then we had Moon and Kitty G. Not surprising that there are 3 of the top 4 teams in there. And also we had guys that did. Now, those are guys that I have on my list. Ultimately, I went in a different direction. Their teams are already good, and they just did a really good job of making the teams work cohesively and obviously taking them to the finals. Now, these are the next group of guys, or the guys that I narrowed it down to. So my 3 guys that I had in here were Packing 10 from the Valiant, Rush from Paris, and Kookie from the Mayhem. Kookie did a job with the Florida that no one really expected. We expected them to be a middle of the pack team. They played a little bit better than expected. It was a lot of stuff going on. He was a former player. He's probably the first former player in Overwatch League that has done something significant in the coaching realm right now. And taking a team like Florida, who had pieces, and getting these pieces to work together and do what they did, he did a fantastic job. Rush in Paris, we just thought that Paris was going to hold ground until they got Sparkle in, but he did an amazing job. Yes, they did have a lot of good parts to start, but he got them together, and he used some of the old parts too that, we didn't expect to do well. Nico, Ben Best, Soon, they're all part of this team that he put in the right places to do maximum amount of work. But ultimately, I went with packing 10 because the Valiant, everybody had them bottom 5 except for like Costa and maybe 1 or 2 other people. They had players that were kind of okay from everybody's standpoint. A couple of standouts like KSP, maybe you could say McGravy in there. He did a job where he took this team of guys that nobody really knew anything about and put them in a position to do a lot of damage and perform well above expectations. Yes, everything this season is kind of weird. They didn't play the teams from APAC. You could say the same thing about Florida with that. But he did an amazing job. He got the most out of this team. He put them, much like the other coaches, he put them in positions where they were comfortable on heroes that they were good at and worked around that. He took his best players and said, let's work around this guy, like guys like KSP. Shax, when Tracer was pretty hot there, and he had Shax playing Tracer and, worked around that. He did an amazing job. He is my coach of the year, hands down. Let's move on. All right, the next one is kind of a fun one. I debated with myself a lot on this. I know it sounds strange. I wasn't like literally sitting here talking, but there's a lot of things I put into this in my head. It's hard to quantify comeback player of the year right now just because of the metas and stuff that were in last season. So GOAT's kind of that last season. As much as people want to like discount this season in not only in Overwatch League, but in a lot of different sports, it's the asterisk, it's the COVID year and all that kind of stuff. Season 2 for Overwatch kind of did that for me. But there are things and players that happened. I wanted to say Fearless was my comeback player of the year, but I didn't. I went with and I'll get into reasons of that later on. I went with Birdring from the LA Gladiators. We all remember Birdring in the beginning of season 1 and how hot he was. He was fantastic. Him and Prophet just doing what they did. He tailed off. He had an injury, and kind of an injury-plagued rest of the season in season 1. Just reading things that people have said and hearing interviews with people, he had injuries where he would not stop playing. They had to like almost physically remove him from playing so he didn't ruin his career. The guy is dedicated. He had an injury, did not play well in season 1, and then of course season 2. This is where my mind had issues. Like DPS players, giving them comeback of the year is easy because DPS came back in. You could say that for any number of guys. Soon played phenomenally well this year. Other guys, Prophet, but it's hard with the DPS guys. Even guys like Fleta or guys like that. But even last year when the metas came back, he didn't really play. So, and when he did play, he did not look the same. But this year with the Valiant, he was revitalized. He was by far and away their best DPS player. Was fantastic on all the heroes he was playing, like Reaper, and he even did well on things like Sombra, back on things like Widow and Ashe, and there were a lot of things people forgot that he's good at Tracer. It's stuff like that. He was fantastic this year. One of the few shining spots on a Gladiators team that pretty much underperformed the whole year long, minus a couple of bits here and there. He was the most consistent player they had on the team, maybe outside of Space. So he was my comeback player of the year. Now, this next one, I've given it the out of nowhere player, a guy who came in and I guess you would say exceeded expectations because we had none, because we didn't really know too much about this guy or had very little opinion at all on him. And I'm going to go, for me this is, because I'm not a big contenders guy. I passively watch, usually in the off season, to see guys or go back and watch what they did in previous seasons or things like that. For me, the one guy I had was Fielder from the Paris Eternal. He came in and he changed that whole team the way they were playing. And he was playing, outrageous ping, all that kind of, all the things that are being brought on from this whole COVID thing. He was a very, very large part of how this team got to where they were. And him along with FD God, who was also on this list for me, basically the whole support line for Paris. They came out of nowhere, and they did a fantastic job. We kind of expected certain guys, I think it was Hip and Cruz, to be in the support line. These two guys came in, especially Fielder. Well, let's talk Fielder more than FD God right now, because he's the guy I gave the award to. And it was a toss-up between those two and KSP, who we saw a little bit of and did a lot of things, with the World Cup and in contenders and things like that. But I went with Fielder ultimately. He is one of the best Anas in the league. His Zenyatta is pretty good too, but he just set this team up for success when Sparkle got in there and they had that nice Genji meta, dropped in their lap. Yes, ultimately they failed at the end, but he was still playing at a very high level on, like I said, outrageous ping. His play alone, it just sparked a lot of comebacks and a lot of things that they did. Not to mention, the nano blades and all that. He is my out of nowhere player for 2020. If you've gotten this far, you're probably wondering why I didn't have Fearless as my comeback player of the year. I have him as my most improved player of the year. A lot of people like the story of he was on the crappy Dragons, went to contenders, fought his way back. People forget when he was on the Dragons. Yes, he had a little bit of history on Element Mystic, played really well there. But once he got to the Dragons, and it probably says more about the whole team that he was on and the coaching and all the other stuff that was going on there, he was not good. He was average at best at Winston, and any other tanks that he was playing in Season 1, he was just meh. He was not the greatest. He was on the worst team in the league, and there was a reason why he went back to contenders. Now, and this is one of those things, too, where the guy himself wanted to improve, and he went to contenders, grounded out, and with the Dragons, before the season started, now, we all thought that they were going to keep, in the offseason this is, before they made the trade with Dallas, we thought they were going to keep Gamsu. It looked good last year. They won that stage. They didn't look bad. Everything looked pretty good, but they traded him away, and you're going, well, who's going to be the tank? They brought in Stand 1, and then you saw Fearless come back, and you're going, I don't know about this. This guy was not good when he was in here before, but let's see. And what he did over the course of the season, yes, he's on a way better team. He also has a way better coaching staff. And he upped his game. He's probably right now, in my mind, outside of Gushue, the best Winston in the league, if not the best Winston, period, right now. Also, he plays the other tanks really solidly as well. He's not just one-tricking a Winston thing. He has a good ball. He plays Reinhardt really well. When they ran, we had the double shield stuff going. He was doing really well at that. He transformed himself into a role star, all-star MVP candidate in my mind. And I gave him the most improved player because he went from someone who did not look good in Season 1. Yes, some of it was a reflection of the guys around him. They had probably the worst support line I've ever seen on that initial Shanghai Dragons team. And that includes the Mayhem's one that was not very good either. But they were just like a step below them. He had no support on that team, but he still underperformed. And when he got back and started playing, it was one of those things. It was like this feel-good thing. You're like, wow, this guy went out really ground, and he has improved his play to the point where he's now the best Winston in the league. I love stories like that. And it's not just a story. It's hard work. It's dedication. This dude went out and ground in contenders because his main goal is to get back. and he knew he needed to improve, and he did that. And my hat's off to Fearless for that. And I know I spent a lot of time on this, but anytime a guy does something like that in any sport, any situation where, they want something bad enough and they improve themselves to the point where they make themselves the best in the league or the best in their sport or job or whatever, I had to tip my cap to them. I thought it was fantastic. There were a couple other guys. I had BQB on there as well in my mind. He was decent last year. He was, it was one of those elements where you're like, okay, yeah, he's pretty good. And he upped his game this year. He was fantastic. There were some other dudes too that were in there that we could go over. I think Smurf also improved from where he was and when we saw him last year. He was known as an Orisa one trick, mainly because that's what the meta dictated. Obviously, they had Super in most of the other time when they were running goats, and then, they had to bring him in towards the end in stage 4 and in the playoffs to run the Orisa, because Super was not the greatest on Orisa. So, yeah, there are other guys, but Fearless is my top guy, and props to that dude. Hopefully we see some good gameplay from him in the finals coming up. Now, the next two are just general team things that I came up with. The surprise team of the year and the most disappointing team of the year. So there's a lot of candidates. Surprise team of the year. Now, there were 2 teams that I had in mind for this, and I have 2 teams in mind. I had 2 teams in mind for disappointing. Actually, I had 3 for disappointing. One team's playing in the finals that would have been counted in, but they upped their game and had a meta. So Seoul could have been in there, but I didn't have them in there. All right, so let's get to it. This was actually harder than the surprise team for me, because there were a few teams that just were nowhere near what we thought they were going to be. I'll give you my ultimate ending on this in a second, but I had the Gladiators in there, very disappointing this year. With the roster that they signed and the guys that they had on that team, I thought they were going to be top 5 easy. They have Oj and Space and Birdring, who was the guy that nobody thought was going to do anything. And then you have Big Goose and Shaz, and their DPS was the question. But they had, Mirror and Jaru to start, and then they put Birdring in. But ultimately, they did not perform up to par. The other team was Hanzhou. They just disappointed the whole year. And they didn't seem to get a grasp of anything. And then COVID hit and they just had no cohesion. They were all over the place. They have great pieces, but by the time they started to gel a little bit, it was just too late. They just couldn't get it together in the playoffs. And then the meta shifted and they just fell apart. I mean, they had one good stage there where they got into the final, but they got hammered by Shanghai. And a lot of that was, in my mind, was just Seoul being disappointing and a couple other teams that are just being disappointing as well. But ultimately, they were one of the most disappointing teams. I told you about Seoul, my feelings on them earlier a little bit. But ultimately, I went with the Atlanta Reign. I had this team as top 3 easily, and a lot of people did. They just were super inconsistent. And they seemed to have not enough chemistry. They were not cohesive. It seemed to be prone to tilting. And then we had things like Erster seemingly not meshing with what they were doing in the DPS line. I mean, the most consistent player they had through 3/4 of the season was Baby Bay, but then he left for Valorant. So that was a blow leadership-wise, I guess, but you had a lot of guys who I was expecting a lot of, Gator and Hawk. Hawk played really well. Gator played well in spurts. Dogman disappointed a little bit. Masa wasn't the same. They just were not the same team that they were last year, and instead of taking a step forward and moving up into the upper echelon of the league, which was where I thought they would be, especially with Erster and adding Edison and some of the pieces that they brought in, Gator and Hawk together, I thought that would have been just not unbeatable, but I thought they would be in a position where we're talking about Philadelphia and San Francisco. I thought they would be in that conversation. But alas, it never happened. They had trouble, they couldn't handle teams like the Mayhem. I think the Mayhem, after they beat them soundly in the beginning of the year, they they lost to them every time after that. Teams like the Valiant gave them fits. They just were not anywhere near what we expected this team to be. So they were my choice ultimately for the most disappointing team of the year. Now let's move on to the surprise team of the year. Now I narrowed it down to 2 teams. You probably are going to expect, what they are. I ultimately went with one team, and not the team you probably would expect from me because I am a Mayhem fan. I did have the Mayhem as in my sights as this team, but they had some roster pieces and things where you said, this team could be better. Yeah, most people had them mid-pack, potentially fighting to get in the play-in, but they ultimately ended up like in the top 4 or 5 teams in NA. But they did have guys like Gangnam Jin. They had Fate, who was established. Gargoyle, who was better than average. And Kuki did a phenomenal job with this team. I'm not going to ever discount any of that. They exceeded expectations greatly. They played really, really cohesively, but they had moments where they fell apart in big situations against teams that were better than them. And ultimately, the team that I chose beat them consistently, and that's the Valiant. I have the Valiant there because if you go back to January and February before the season started, I don't think there was one person outside of Custa, who I've said multiple times, that had them anywhere near the top 15, let alone the top 10. And they just had this ragtag bunch of guys that you're like, okay, these guys were on the Mayhem last year. They got cut. They got picked up. Guys like McGravy and Rain and KSF and then Apply. And you have all these guys. You're going, who are these guys? And then they bring in KSP. And even pre-COVID, with the online gameplay and all that, where you could say that they had lesser opponents and all that, they did beat Dallas in a Dallas homestand. So they were proving that they were a good team before we got to the situation that we have right now with COVID and the online play and the long break. And they're one of the teams that, were kind of in flux. They missed a lot of games early on, but they worked on their game during that time, but exceeded expectations would be an understatement at this point, because exceeding expectations for this team before the season would have been maybe top 12 getting into the play-ins. They were up there with the Mayhem and a couple other teams, the Gladiators, you could even say, in that 4 to 8, 4 to 10 range of teams. And they just proved that they're kind of not meta-proof, which was one of the flaws of them and the Mayhem to an extent. But they had moments where they played really well in very varied circumstances with hero pools and that kind of thing. They had, we had the stage where Shax was going nuts on Tracer. We had things where KSP was doing really well on Ashe and on Widowmaker and other things. And we had an above expectation performance from this team. And they annoyed me to no end because I'm a Mayhem fan and they were the thorn in our side and they beat us multiple times in important situations, and it drove me nuts, and I'm looking forward to next year and beating them. But along with the coaching staff, and if you look at these two teams, their coaching staffs coach these teams up that I have. But ultimately, Packing 10 was my coach of the year. And that translates into the surprise team of the year because, yes, I could have gone with, like I said, I could have gone with Florida. You could even say teams like Guangzhou surprised a little bit. Or Philadelphia. People thought they were going to be good, but, no one thought they were going to be top 2 in NA or take the number 1 seed away from San Francisco even. But ultimately, the Valiant proved to be a good team coached by a great coach. And I'm looking forward to see what they do next year. Circumstances, and we don't know any of that stuff yet. Hopefully we get some answers to that. I'm definitely keeping my ear out for any kind of updates on the 2021 season and all that kind of stuff, because we're going to have one, but it feels kind of weird right now. I mean, this is a tangent, but just because BlizzCon is in February and generally around the start of the league. So I'm wondering if they're going to incorporate that into the virtual BlizzCon. But so that is the award show. Please comment down below. Tell me who you guys had for these various things that I have. Obviously, check my MVP video and my video for Rookie of the Year to check and see who I had in those. Really no surprises there in who I picked. I mean, I had Fleta, and I also have Alarm. They haven't announced that yet, and they haven't announced a Coach of the Year yet either. But I'm pretty confident in Alarm getting it. Yeah, there were a lot of guys. I mean, you could go a lot of different directions. But check that video out if you want to know who I have for Rookie of the Year, and for, if you want to see the reasons why I had MVP, Fleta MVP. Go ahead. They'll be on playlists and all that kind of stuff on the channel. But let's talk about what we got coming up. So I took a little break for a week or so. Wanted to clear my head, get ready for the playoffs, rewatch some teams and some matches and things like that. I wanted to get back into the swing, really break this down and see outside of the obvious, this guy's great and that guy's great, some of the things that these teams do that make them great. And we're going to do a few episodes featuring the teams, probably 4 10 to 15 minute videos on each of the teams between now and next week. And then look for somewhere around Wednesday of next week, the day before we get to the finals, my ultimate finals preview, where I go over the matches, who I like, who I think is going to win, and ultimately who the champion's going to be. But that's going to do it for this episode, guys. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me. Thank you to everybody on YouTube. All of your support has been greatly appreciated. I mean that. Thank you for all the support that you've given me, likes, conversations we've had, and let's keep these conversations going down below. I love talking Overwatch League with you guys. So let's get this going. Let's get this rolling. Let's talk about awards and start getting ready for the grand finals, which are going to start next week. And then we're going to have the off season. And I got some different stuff I'd like to try out as far as content goes during the off season. And, we're going to have some fun with this. Can't wait to get that rolling for you guys so we can get some more conversations going about the league and all the fun stuff that entails. But until then, this is Misfit. I'm out. Everybody stay safe. Have a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you on the next one.